RFQ process, you receive the proposals in, they're based on qualifications, they're not based on price. To look at experience, past projects, and so forth, how much they know about your community's needs and your project specifically, and so forth. From that, you typically interview either all or some of those. You guys chose to interview all four firms, and we did that on June the 30th. And from that, typically you would start to negotiate a scope and fee with the firm that scored the highest from your interview score sheets or through the process. It is something that can be talked about, but that's kind of the criteria of using this format of the RFQ, is to try to make it a fair process and to kind of look at different opinions and different things as far as their different expertise and different things, instead of just looking at price, which a lot of folks do because that's the most important thing usually. So, but also you really do need to look at qualifications, because a lot of times in the long run, that could cost you more in the long run too. So it's the town's decision, but that is how the process came out. Typically you would negotiate, like I said, with the highest or best one. If you can't negotiate a scope and fee with them, then you typically would go to the next.
Well, it's very close, and they're not the same, of course, qualification-wise and interview-wise. So,
and that's something you can take into consideration. So,
yes.
That's why it's up to the evaluation committee. So.
they are. So I guess we take it under advisement for study and evaluation.
You can do that if you choose to do that, yes.
You want to set a special meeting to,
Well, I guess what my question is at this point, we've gone through the interviews, we've read their criteria, and based on what I saw, I mean, it's pretty well spread across the board, so there's no bias one way or the other. At this point, is the decision to select the engineering firm a committee decision, or is it a board decision?
It comes down to being a board decision. It's the board that chose the evaluation committee. It is, the board's project, town's project.
So at this point, I don't think we should dissolve our committee, because it's going to be the committee that we're going to be working with moving on. But if it's ultimately going to come down to a board decision, should we let the evaluation and the numbers talk for themselves, or do we need to meet as a big group and talk through it further? I mean,
I've never done this before.
well, and neither have anybody at this table, but we have good data in front of us.
I see it as another evaluation went along with the qualifications and with the interview, and now we've got this, and you have to show the consensus.
We can beat a dead horse to death.
Yeah.
I think that all of the information provided to us was beneficial for myself. Because after the interviews, I went back and read through some of the other stuff again, just to make sure that I was correct in what I was hearing. So I'm assuming that if I did that, everyone else did that too. So I'm comfortable with what they say from a committee standpoint. I'm ready for us to take it to the board level now and make our decision based on the data that's provided right there. I think that we need, I mean, it may be a long-term clock that's ticking, but the clock's ticking, y'all. We need to get this done.
I think definitely we will.
Okay.
I like to be able to, somebody may have thoughts, so far we've been working totally separate.
Yes, absolutely.
And I haven't talked to anybody about their thoughts on it, but I think maybe they know something or caught something that I didn't say.
That's why I was impressed by those numbers, because it was no big slide one way or the other. So I think, to your point, I think everybody pretty much heard the same thing.
And I don't know whether the transparency guidelines will allow us to discuss anything like that. Would you want to make a guess on that?
Typically, when we go through the RFQ process, and some of the engineering firms that are out there can probably tell you the same thing. Whenever you go through the RFQ process, there is the selection, the evaluation committee. Typically, when you go through the RFQ process, whenever they do the interviews and so forth, typically it's just that evaluation committee that sits in on the interview and does that process. It's kind of confined to that. They were chosen to do that. I guess is what I'm saying. So typically, you don't have to have the public meetings and all whenever we go through the RFQ process.
Say that one more time.
Typically, going through the RFQ process, it's typically not at a public meeting whenever you do like the interviews for that process. You bring the information to the board whenever it's done, like the results and so forth. Typically would come to the board then.
But that's all been done. I mean, and we made those public. So we, instead of doing the norm and those be private, we made those public. But from this point on, as far as it being a board decision, that has to be public. Because we're meeting.
But we could meet as a committee, not a board. What are you saying about discussion?
We could have.
But could we still, like he's talking about, having another meeting to talk as a committee, not as the board?
I think we missed something there. I think it'd been a very valuable thing to do. So I see this as a very strong point, or
Yeah, we may or may not have missed the opportunity to do that, but I also think that by not doing that, I think we got good data.
What do you say, which one they normally go by, the good qualification? Or
You can look at both of them. Typically, they'll go by the interview. And I say that because the proposal stage comes first, and sometimes they don't interview all folks. So see, sometimes you may get 5 or 8 proposals in, but you may only interview 3 or 5. So you shortlist them down to that. So the others are out of it at that point if they don't get interviewed.